this is 2020, and I have no doubt in saying that in the past 10 years, the biggest disruption that has happened in any industry has been the mobility industry. There have been 4 key themes that we have seen, 4 pillars, which is autonomous driving, connectivity, electrification, and shared mobility. What we call ACEs has been the key dominant theme for mobility in the last 10 years or so. At the start of the panel discussion, what I would want is all of us to take a few minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, brief introduction of what you are, the organization that you are engaged with, and the key initiatives that you have been working on. And then we'll come to context setting and a few questions on the key themes of mobility and e-mobility in particular. My name is Arnab. I work for NITI Aayog, and I lead our efforts in frontier technologies, which includes broadly artificial intelligence, Industry 4.0, fintech, etc. And in terms of the responsibilities that I have, it includes, so some of you who may not be about NITI Aayog. NITI Aayog is the central strategy-making body for the government. Think of us as McKinsey for the government. We strategize, we build execution plans, and we implement on limited scale or several of our projects. Cheryl, if we could start with you on the introductions.
So my name is Cheryl. I am the director of Asia and also Europe for Vertec Capital. We're a global investment and advisory firm, focusing particularly on the integration of innovative technologies in infrastructure sectors, particularly focusing on mobility and energy.
Hi, my name is Mahesh Babu. I head the electric division in the Mahindra Group. Mahindra Group is a $20 billion group, and we are the first pioneer in electric mobility in India. We have about 180 million kilometers of electric mobility experience in India, and we participate in many forms in different sustainable practices across the industry.
Hello, my name's Catherine Bremner. Can I just say it's such an honor to be here this evening talking about this topic. So I'm from the UK Government, Department for Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy, and I'm here with the President for COP this year. UK is hosting the climate change talks in Glasgow, and we hope to have industry, finance, and governments represented this year in Glasgow. So it'll be colder than here, though, so bring your jumpers. But really, tonight I'm here to talk about the UK's commitment to net zero and how electric vehicles and mobility fit within that.
Good evening, lady. Good evening to all of you. My name is Siddarthan. I represent an institution called ClimateWorks Foundation, based in San Francisco in California. My role is a broader philanthropy, how to mobilize philanthropy in the global fight against climate change. Transportation and transformation of transportation is an important agenda. We work globally. All key geographies, United States, Europe, China, India, and to some extent Brazil. In India, it is a variety of work partners we work with, the international partners. Some of us are here. And my role is to kind of give the India perspective, as well as India and the global perspective to several foundations in the Bay Area and Europe.
Thank you very much. My name is Harj Dhaliwal. I'm the Managing Director for Virgin Hyperloop One. I suppose it's very easy to say we're a startup company, and what we're really doing is revolutionizing the way all of us will travel in the future. So what we have been doing since 2014 is developing what we call as the 5th mode of transport, and that is Hyperloop technology, where you have a tube, we evacuate the air, we put a capsule or a pod, and then we are able to move people and goods at very high speeds. We're the only company in the world to have actually developed, built, and tested Hyperloop technology at full scale just outside Las Vegas in Nevada. And we've been working here now with the Indian federal government and the state government of Maharashtra for nearly 2 years now on a project between Mumbai and Pune.
Wonderful. So thank you everyone for the brief introductions. Let me jump quickly into the discussions. If you look at 2019, it wouldn't be unfair to say that 2019 was a landmark year when it comes to mobility. We saw 2 of the biggest mobility companies globally, Uber and Lyft, going public. We also saw a lot of realism coming into what technology can and cannot do. We saw that several companies, at least in the autonomous driving space, saying that this can't be done for the next several years. For example, level 4 and level 5 automation. can't be done for the next several years. What we also saw was several governments, cities, etc., putting their foot down on what can be the standards and what can be the level of carbon emissions that we will see globally. So in that context, I would want to start with Siddarth, you, and discuss how, what has been the biggest driver for the title of the discussion that we have, e-mobility. What is the biggest driver of electrification globally? Is it purely climate change and the steps taken? Is it a combination of that plus it makes a sense economically, financially, etc.?
Thank you. I think given the transformation of transportation, India is making the waves right now. And I think before starting even anything, the one statement Prime Minister said in the MOVE Summit in 2018 struck me. And maybe we are the only country, or one of the few countries who declared mobility as an economic opportunity. That statement has very deep meaning in terms of what does it mean. The Prime Minister saying that and followed up with a series of policies and action is really struck me and stays with me. So that one is the first thing globally also. China, for example, though Beijing air pollution was a big driver for a city, but as several countries, I would say, including India, we say economic opportunity, how to convert the mobility, a problem into an economic opportunity, that's one. And I want to focus slightly India than before going to global. For us, it is very compelling reason. One is, I don't have to emphasize the point, last year, the last financial year, India's crude oil import was around $120 billion. It is almost a 60% of the trade deficit or the foreign exchange we have. That's crude oil. Put it in a perspective, every dollar increase in the barrel, India's import bill goes by 2 billion. $1 goes up a dollar and 2 billion import bill. So the first one for India is how to secure the energy security in such a way we are not subject to the global fluctuation, what is happening in Iran, the US-Iranian tension. We shouldn't be all the time worried about what is happening outside to drive the vehicle right here or doing public transport. That's one, energy security. The second one, I think Dr. Srivastava clearly said about the air quality. We don't want to live with the reputation of hosting all the dirtiest cities in the world. That's not the way we want to be. So how to provide a cleaner electricity by providing cleaner transportation, cleaner air, the quality of life, second one. And that's global again, including California, which is supposed to be the leader. Even in the outer Los Angeles area and some of the area, it is polluted according to EPA standards. And the third one I would say, as I said, is it is an opportunity, again, for entrepreneurship, innovation, movement of investment and capital. And the final one, of course, is the climate goals, because with transportation globally is reaching almost 1/3, it is rapidly going up as urban centers becoming the global emission centers. Unless we tackle the transportation, no country is going to achieve its climate goals, not certainly India. So that's a key driver globally and certainly India. And finally, I think it is about watching the technology trends, whether it is falling battery cost, falling motor cost, or finding alternative material for cells, or even chemistry for that matter, or the invention in the power electronics. The more innovation happen, that need to be kind of commercialized, and transportation provides a venue globally. So those are the things I would list. It's a combination of India drivers, global drivers, but I would stop there. I can get into. Those are the things I would say off the cuff, the key drivers as I see.
That's wonderful to know. If you think about electric vehicle sales globally, in the past several years, we have seen hyper growth. Sales have grown by, say, 60, 65%, 70% year on year. However, if you see the penetration of electric vehicles globally, it's still less than 2.5%. In that context, Mahesh, I have this question for you. If you look at the way China has approached it, or Europe and the USA have approached it, they have gone distinct ways as a four-wheeler, compared to what India has adopted, which is primarily a two-wheeler and a three-wheeler market. So, and Mr. Srivastava had highlighted some of the initiatives that the government has been taking. So in that context, I wanted to understand from you, what's your perspective of the policies and the regulations that the government has put in place, and how that helps electric vehicle manufacturer like yourself?
I think that's a very good point, Arnab, you have asked. I think when we look at technology to transform life of people, it should also be depending on what society you deal with. Now, if you look at India, India is a country which is very, very sensitive for use of energy because it's scarce and it has to be very prudently used. And then if you look at the best way for any mobility in the city today is by foot, which you don't want to do unless it is less than a kilometer. The next best way you will sustainably move from one place to another is a two-wheeler. And if you can make a two-wheeler electric, it's the most economic way and I would say a lower footprint to move from one place to another. The next one shared is the three-wheeler and so on and so forth till we reach car. Now, India has a very low car penetration. We have about 22 cars per 1,000. And then, you know, US has 900 plus and Europe has about 700 plus. But most of the mobility design in the West happened when the energy was available abundant, and that's not a concern. But when we are growing now at a very high GDP rate, we need to be, at this century, be very careful in using and utilizing energy for transportation. I'm happy India is part of Solar Alliance. I'm happy that we are doing a very clear definition of what we want to do in generation of renewables. I'm also pretty sure that what policy Indian government has released on electrification, whether it is fiscal or non-fiscal, I think it is a very proactive approach on enabling players like us. I would say that when we have invested in electric mobility more than 2 decades almost, there were no one who were the believer. We were alone for quite long time, I would say more than a decade. And with a lot of policy intervention from government in last, let's say 5 to 6 years, I think we are able to see a lot of global players coming and launching electric vehicles in India because India is seen as an opportunity next to it. You said China. China is a different model. China has a similar problem of oil import. Close to 70% of their energy transportation needs getting imported. India has a very acute problem of much more than that. I would say India is a democratic country. It's not like China, you decide and then you start doing things. India, we have been doing in the other dialogues, how it is important to create an inclusive society when you transform, rather than just somebody decides on doing it. And I believe the government of India has done a very right thing to engage with customers, engage with industry, engage with all policyholders, and then said, okay, I think most of our sale, around 80% is two-wheeler, about 1 million is about three-wheeler, and most of them are public transport. So that's the low-hanging fruit. Let's try this. I think when the clear direction is there, which happened in the recent past, I would say like 2-3 years, you will see a lot of players coming in. It gives clarity for us to invest even. So I think what's happening in the recent past, there's a clear direction from the government. We are also seeing customers embracing it fast because wherever trials we did with our vehicle, we have not sold it just because it's environmental friendly. No customer is willing to buy a three-wheeler or a two-wheeler or a car just because you want to save the world. We have been selling everywhere that we are going to save for you, not for the world. So we have made our application, let's say our car, more economically viable in fleet segment and prove to fleet that you are earning more money and you need not spend more for electric vehicle to save environment. Once the customer drove it, now he has ordered 1,000 cars. So we have 1,000 cars in the platform. Similarly, when we say three-wheeler, we have a three-wheeler trio in the market. We are saying the owner or the customer is earning more money while driving electric vehicles. So we are looking at very unique solutions for India, which is not just environmental friendly, but making economic viability and improve lives of people. I believe there is a huge opportunity of learning in that, and that can be even a role model for the rest of the world to understand how we are very sensitive to not just bring a technology, but transform life of the people.
So continuing on that policy thread and government being an enabler and putting in place policies that work for that specific country. Catherine, I wanted to pick on you for the next thread of discussion. The government of UK came with its industrial strategy in late 2017, and one of the four themes in grand challenges was future of mobility, with emphasis on low carbon transport. And a lot of work has been done since then. If you could quickly tell us what has been the progress in the past 2 years on this front.
Thank you. And I just want to echo the comments, if I may, of Mr. Srivastava. Part of what we're trying to do in the UK is exactly what you were saying. Last year, we legislated to go net zero by 2050. But that was based on, I started working with the UK government back in 2001, where you couldn't talk about a climate target. You had to talk about a goal or an ambition, around 80%. And it's been a 20-year journey, and we have always focused on economic growth over that period. And air quality is key, and then climate. And within that context, since 1990, the UK has reduced its emissions by 42%, but grown the economy by over 70%. And I think that's really important. And as you look at, I'm an engineer, and there's much smarter engineers in the room than me here, but one of the things that I've found fascinating is the cost curve over that period. If I go back to our old models of where we thought solar prices would be today versus where we started modelling back in 2001, 2002, and offshore wind in the UK is now the largest generator of offshore wind, we got it all wrong. Technology innovation has been much quicker, and it's come from India, it's come from China, a lot of those cost reductions because of the scale of your country. So I think in terms of mobility, the UK has done a lot already in the power sector. We'll be phasing out coal by 2025. Last year we had 80 days without coal, lots of offshore wind. The next big sector for us is transport. And our Department for Transport published the UK's Road to Net Zero. And it's in the last year. And that we want to be the UK at the forefront of design and manufacturing of zero-emission vehicles. So we've put a lot of R&D money in the next generation we have the Faraday Challenge, which came out of the industrial strategy, about batteries and battery storage. We're partnering with India through the World Bank on battery storage technology, because it's that interplay. You know, the home of the future could be a power station, and it could be your charging point. So I think there's some really interesting innovations there we want to work with India on. The Road to Zero strategy really sets out a long-term path. And by 2030, we want at least half new cars sold to be low emissions, as many as 70% to be ultra low emission, and alongside 40% of new vans. We anticipate by 2040 that all new cars will be zero carbon. So that's a challenge also, it's an infrastructure challenge. So the government is investing 1.5 billion in grants to help with the charging, so plug-in points for cars, vans, lorries. And if I could share a story with you, a friend of mine's in IT and banking in the City of London, and they've recently leased an electric vehicle. And she was coming to my place on the weekend. She said, I'll just get the app, because there's an app that the government's created with all the charging stations, and can, you know, work out exactly where she can charge. She said, I'll be there, but you need to. And so it's a bit of a behaviour change, but they love the car. It's quiet, it's fast, you know. And so the only thing I would ask is if India could just reduce the cost, you know, I think that would make an enormous difference to not only our economies, but yours as well, and our road to net zero.
Wonderful. And I'm really glad you brought up the Faraday Challenge. We all believe that if we have to move away from conventional to clean energy consumption, exponential technologies are one of the key levers, probably the most important lever if we have to achieve that goal. On that context, Harj, Hyperloop 1 is an exponential technology. I mean, it's quite different from the way we think or we imagine how mobility works. So if you could take a few minutes, and I know you described this, but if you could take a few minutes on how this works in the context of a country like India, which is extremely price conscious, and what has been the update on the Mumbai-Pune Hyperloop project that we have heard so much about?
Sure. There's a lot there I've got to cover, okay? So let's start off by putting some context. when we consider us as people, we will always continue to move. We'll always continue to travel. And when we start looking at statistics, by 2040, travel trips are going to double. So we're not going to stop traveling. We as humans are never going to stop doing that, okay? But if you look at the Indian context, what's happening in India, there's a migration crisis going on, and I think everybody understands that very clearly. Yeah, everybody wants opportunity. Everybody has to travel to gain that opportunity. And tier one cities at the moment have a population of about 300 million. That's going to go to 600 million by 2030. Okay? At the same time, our behaviors are changing. Our behaviors are changing due to technology. And this is very interesting because what's happening now is we're living in an on-demand world, and e-commerce is now driving our expectations. Sorry about that. But what we've now got is e-commerce driving expectations. And what I mean by that now is that in an on-demand world where e-commerce accounts for $4 trillion, that's the equivalent of the GDP of a country like Germany, which is actually going to increase by fourfold by 2040, will only mean that more travel, more reliance on transport is required, okay? Because no longer are we going to wait, 5 days or a month for a delivery. We want it now in hours, days, not months and weeks, okay? So that's going to happen. So the express delivery market is going to increase again by fourfold. Air travel by 2040 is going to double. So in that context, when we start thinking about climate change, we start talking about emissions. Let's just give you another example on emissions. Since 2010, in the developed countries, 30% of emissions, CO2 emissions, are attributable to transport. Okay, 30%. Now, what does that mean? I'll put it into figures. That's 7 gigatons of carbon dioxide emitted into the atmosphere. 7 gigatons. Nobody knows what that is. I'll tell you, it's the equivalent weight of 7 billion people times 20 emitted since 2010 from transport in developed countries. Overall, transport globally accounts for about 15% of emissions, okay? So it's a huge crisis that we've now got. So when we start looking at how do we act, how do authorities act, countries act, then technology has a big part to play. But we can't just do it in incremental steps. I think Sir David Attenborough today has been all over the BBC News basically saying that we've got to a point now, it's crunch time, we've got to make some decisions. No longer can we kick the can down the road regarding climate change. And transport has a massive, massive part to play. I'm not even going to talk about health and the impact on health. And we're here in Delhi where it's got one of the worst air qualities in the world. But more importantly, I think what I'm saying is that we need something radical. And that's where our technology is now starting to come in. And our technology works on the principle that you have a tube, you evacuate the air to about 1/1000th of an atmosphere. It's semi-space conditions. That's the equivalent, by the way, of flying at about 200,000 feet. So it's the edge of space, okay? And the best way to describe the technology in a nutshell, it's a crossover from space, aerospace, and high-speed rail engineering. And I think it's absolutely fascinating what we're doing because we're also bringing in AI technology, autonomous technology, machine learning on top of that. So technologies that were not available 10 or even 5 years ago are now available. And what we at Hyperloop One are doing is picking up that, putting it together into a platform, and we're now developing the fifth mode of transport, a very fast, very clean, very efficient way of moving both people and transporting goods. So that's, in a nutshell, where we are. But more importantly, that's just the transport. It's about you. It's about how you and me and all of us want to travel in the future. Because future travel is about your passenger experience, the ability to be able to travel on demand when you want. No longer should we be relying on timetables. Timetables were, a thing of the past when we didn't have the computing power that you've got on your smartphones in your hand, more than what the Apollo missions had for the first landing on the moon, okay? So what we are now looking at is a system that's on demand, direct to destination. Our vehicles, our pods, will only go to where you want to go. I think that's the other key feature. And the fact that we're now in a vacuum environment, we've removed the single biggest impediment for us to travel on Earth. That's the air that's around us, the air that we breathe. So once that's removed and you're in a very a controlled environment, using electric power, very low emissions. In fact, there's no emissions at the point of use. We are now using very little energy to actually move at high speeds in a very fast and efficient manner. Tie that into the autonomous technology, the AI technology that we're developing, into smart cities. Now what we've got is a transport system that has very little human interference, very little human intervention. And it's gathering data from the smart city grid around you, and it's actually starting to predict what demand is required of it in 2 hours, 5 hours, 24 hours. Now what you've got is a highly energy efficient system tied into a very highly effective on-demand use system, which is going to be very highly utilized. So each vehicle, each pod is going to be really on demand based on what's happening around you. So having said that, I think what I'm going to come on to now is the pricing side of it. Here in India, we've been working for 2 years now on developing our project. We're in the most price-sensitive travel economy in the world, probably, I would think. The other thing we have to be very, very acutely aware of is that this is a mass transport system. It's not a transport system for the few. And it's very important that, that message comes out, because what we're doing here is being able to produce a system that is going to be able to transport people and goods in an ability where it's affordable. It has to be affordable, because the project in Mumbai and Pune that we are developing is privately funded. It is 100% funded from our investors, and then eventually it'll be from traditional sources as we go forward. So for us, it's making sure that we integrate our system. It ties in and understands the other modes of travel in corridors. The corridors are able to generate revenue for you. They're able to then generate a revenue that enables us to not seek subsidies for the long term, okay? And that is also very important. Finally, I just want to push off one other thing. One of the big area that we're working on, it's not just about transportation in a corridor going fast from A to B. It's also the ecosystem that goes with it, the ability to be able to create jobs, manufacturing in a high technology environment. And from our own calculations, from our own studies, and working with the likes of PwC, KPMG, and the state governments and federal governments here, our estimates for creating jobs on that project in Mumbai is the ability to be able to create about 16,000 jobs in the first 5 years. In the medium term, to be able to create 128,000 jobs in the adjacent synergies, both direct and indirect. And then in the long term, over the lifetime of the concession, which is a long concession, so I'm not going to tell you the exact length right now, but it's a long concession. Over the lifetime of the concession, we are looking at creating about 1.5 million jobs in adjacent technologies like battery, EV, software, AI, autonomous engineering.
That's actually fascinating to know. New and emerging technology that are actually going to create more jobs. And when we think of technology, the first thing that we say is automation, jobs going away, etc. So that's actually wonderful and very reassuring to understand.
I think it's a point that gets overlooked. I think people are so scared of technology that they forget that what you are doing is creating another platform. And that's very important.
Wonderful. You did mention about, this all being privately funded, and that is where, Cheryl, I want to come to you. If you look at the mobility space in the past 10 years, the investments have been north of 250 billion. Last 3 years alone, we have seen investments more than 130 billion. In fact, I just got a message that a company called Joby Aviation has raised 590 million. And all they do is air taxis. And Toyota is one of the biggest investors in them. So Cheryl, given the global landscape of investment in mobility, what are the key themes that one should be aware of, where it is headed, and what we have seen in the past few years?
Thank you. So at Vertec, we've really seen obviously a couple of key global trends. I think the first one I want to talk about is digital twin and vehicle-to-everything connectivity. But when I talk about trends, I also want to emphasize that when we invest in mobility, we also have to invest in smart cities. We cannot talk about one without the other. Why? Because a lot of public infrastructure is very much lagging behind in terms of the ability to take the load of all these new technologies. We talk about peer-to-peer, vehicle charging, for example, V2X connectivity, and all of that. Emerging Asia, many societies in emerging Asia do not even have strong, resilient public infrastructure to support public transport, much less talk about all these very ambitious technologies. So when we say, investment in mobility is also about investment in smart cities, we talk about moving beyond car sharing to really deep infrastructure digitalization. And when we do that, we look at investment trends in refinancing some of these sort of public projects. So for example, we employ a twin approach with traditional project finance. We look at instruments like guarantees to de-risk projects, bonds to raise debt financing, etc. We combine that and we look at and we partner with not just with institutional traditional investors, but also with venture funds that are very focused on the startup side of things. So the growth of secondary markets and the kind of improved liquidity and infrastructure finance has really allowed us to open up new trends in mobility investments. So some key examples here. So one of our partner funds in Thailand, for example, they've just invested about $2 million in ASEAN's first electric and autonomous tuk-tuks. So really talking about three-wheeler transport and two-wheeler transport focusing on last mile connectivity, as pointed out by my colleagues here on this panel. We also see institutional investors like the Asian Development Bank looking at pilots and programs for e-tracks and e-bikes. EVs are always linked to air quality and pollution, as well as climate interests. So e-ferries, e-jeepneys in the Philippines are also another interesting trend. Globally also, there is also more increased collaboration between energy and transportation because of EVs. So investors are really looking at funding companies that have diverse revenue models in both sectors. So for example, EV chargers can also provide energy aggregation and demand response services to utilities. Vertec ourselves, we're also launching a new pilot for peer-to-peer energy trading that is powered by solar power and also backed by carbon credits. So we see a lot of this kind of new models of doing things that combine both traditional finance, but also with the venture capital side of things, and look at this kind of intersections.
Wonderful. Catherine, I'm going to come back to you. And you did mention about the net zero strategy, the 2050 strategy, and in your industrial strategy, I'd also seen a £474 million investment fund. So my questions specific are, what are the investment and regulatory interventions that you think government of UK is going to put in place to achieve 100% ultra-low emission vehicles?
Thank you. And the way the government looks at net zero is very whole of economy. And so I'd love to say there was a silver bullet that could get you to net zero, but it covers all sectors and generally both carrot and stick levers. And so in designing this policy, we're looking where government does need to spend funding to bring down the cost curves, to put in infrastructure, to set the policy framework. But our philosophy behind it is we want really private sector to invest at scale. So within that context, we've our OLEV has awarded 300 million in grants in the R&D. We're encouraging public sector uptake. We believe public sector are a big buyer themselves. So, we're saying that we want car fleets that are low emission. So we set targets around procurement in car fleets. And then we're also supporting the development of hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles. So we have a number of programs looking at new technology development. So that's in, if you like, market pool measures. So how can we really get the technology developed? How can we bring the costs down? In areas too where we'd like UK manufacturing to be competitive. Then I think in terms of, that's at the early stage of development. And we also have what's called the British Business Bank, which does venture capital. So, we're working with others in terms of leveraging capital in that early stage. Then if we look at support to local authorities, we are doing this in a number of ways. So bus fleets, London, Milton Keynes, Nottingham are kind of go ultra low areas, low emission buses, taxi charging infrastructure as well. The other thing that, we are also looking at is around then for motorists and infrastructure. So on the motorist side, I mentioned earlier, plug-in car grants, they cover vans and taxis and motorcycles. So maybe we could have a chat afterwards. But I think the other thing too is on infrastructure. So in infrastructure, it's really about how do we get the charging infrastructure built up and down the country. So the government has signalled a number of different schemes, both on our major motorways and within towns. I think what's really interesting for me, having come from financing, is we're seeing all kinds of innovative financing models come up around this. So whether it's you buy your own vehicle, whether it's a lease option, whether it's, the fleets are owned by the manufacturers themselves. So what I'm quite excited about is what we're trying to do is set a framework to allow competition and innovation in the market to develop, which I know something India does very well at scale as well.
Sure. Thanks, Catherine. And it's fascinating how you discussed about innovative financing models. What needs to be understood is, and I think most of us in this room do, is electric vehicles are far more expensive than internal combustion engine or conventional vehicles. Some estimates put that at $12,000 handicap compared to a regular four-wheeler. So Mahesh, help us understand why battery EVs and hybrid EVs are expensive, and for a conventional OEM like yourself, the Mahindra heritage, what tech innovations will enable you to move away from the subsidy model that we have to this being financially viable model?
Yeah. See, there is no one answer to this, but we'll have to look at what happened in the past, and we'll also kind of predict what will happen in the future. Automotive industry has become affordable when actually it was mass produced. When, let's say, Model T from Ford made it mass produced, the car became so affordable that everybody started using it. So if you look at the auto industry, the theory is the more you produce, the economics of scale is better because you are distributing a variable cost across a fixed cost, and then innovation comes in and then goes on. That's one theory. Now, second one is if you look at, apply that in what's happening in batteries and what's happening in technology, what I can say is there is no reason if you leave the battery alone, and there is no reason for an electric car to be more expensive because the motor, the other parts are, in fact, simple, it's more efficient, and there is no reason, there are less moving parts, and there is no reason it has to be more costly. Now come to the battery. Battery right now is storing energy, and it's also kind of half of your energy is stored there. But if you look at total cost of ownership, that means life cycle cost of using a vehicle during its lifetime, I think already in fleet application, in three-wheeler application, they are all almost break-even, close to, let's say, 5 years if you use a vehicle. I also all propagate a theory for us, for example, our first vehicle, few of them have run about 200,000 kilometers. And we asked the customers to give it back for 200,000 rupees. Customers are not willing to give back because the value of that car is still more than 200,000 rupees after 200,000 kilometers. Means that electric vehicle is actually for life. You can keep using it. You can replenish batteries, but the whole vehicle other than the batteries is kind of for life. The motor can run for 15 years, hundreds of thousands of kilometers. There's nothing going to degrade in it. So we'll have to move from initial acquisition cost model to a new model of total cost of ownership. If you do that, some of the segments, EVs are at this rate break even. But having said that, there is a huge potential because we have not even crossed, let's say, 3 million or 4 million vehicles globally on EV. And assume if you apply that to the mass scale of production, which applies to auto industry, I think there is a huge upside to reduce cost at least to 30 to 40% in next 2 to 3 years, which is what IC engine difference is today. And IC engine is going to be kind of scrutinized very closely for reducing emission and become more efficient. That's going to put cost pressure on it. So I would say between 2022 and 25, I would say the cost parity will come in, even in initial cost of acquisition between IC and EVs, while total cost of ownership in some segment is already better.
Okay. Can you also quickly touch upon the R&D efforts that is going on at Mahindra Electric to bring down this cost?
So if you look at what's happening in R&D in most of the automobile, particularly in India, India has a very clear Make in India concept. The Make in India is not manufactured in India. We have to actually create IPRs, create knowledge around the electric ecosystem, not only on vehicle, but on charging, the life cycle use of vehicle during the lifetime and so on. So we have been doing a lot of efforts. So from day one, even though we say we are part of a $20 billion Mahindra group, Mahindra Electric is a separate startup for you, Cheryl, to think about it. So Mahindra Electric is a separate, like a startup. We are about 700 people, out of which 500 is R&D engineers. So we are more into creating BMS algorithms, AI learning from what 180 million kilometers we have, and we create value of efficiency more and more into the system. Because on safety, battery needs to be safe. It has to operate at various conditions, altitude, temperatures. Delhi in summer goes about 45, 46 degree temperature. And it's very unique because most of the experience of electric vehicles today, it's not much in tropical countries like us. And it's really challenging to handle. And I'm happy to say that even though we are the pioneer till now, we never had any safety incidents, even at 50 degree temperature of ambience in Delhi by operating our vehicles. So that's the knowledge of IPR we are building in. So we strongly believe that the IPR and the knowledge developed in this ecosystem, which is available, and we have been telling it's open, we don't want to hold it. And this experience we are happy to share with our colleagues, because it's more about building the ecosystem of electric mobility than you holding the IPR to yourself. So we are happy to share. We have a mobility platform to share and things like that. So I strongly believe the new technology, it's not about manufacturing in India. I strongly believe that we can create value in the ecosystem in a different way than other countries as well.
Wonderful. We have FAME 2, which is the faster adoption of and manufacturing of electrical vehicles in India in effect right now. And the first order effect of that would be more than 7 million tons of CO2 emissions that will be avoided. And there are several multifolds of secondary order emission reductions. So Siddarthan, coming to you, as a country, help us strategize for the future. What more can we do as a country from a policy perspective to make sure that we remain a clean country?
That's a very broad question, I think. I think quite a few things, because one thing I can say in the upfront, what we see in this country is unprecedented. That's what we said. You said it in your opening remark. Nothing like this happened. People compare it with the cell phone, but it is a more personal thing which you can put it on a pocket and go. And this mobility transformation, what is happening in this country is unprecedented, I would say, in a good sense. 3 years ago, it was not even a boardroom discussion, it was a lead discussion. So the National Mission for Electric Mobility came up in 2013. Everything what we talk of today happened last 2 years. And 2019 being the year of EV, for every matter. I think I would say a few things, what can happen. One is about what I think Mahesh alluded to, there should be more vehicles on the road. People have to see that it is running, driving in, like in the Tesla experience of California. People, once you sit, then they won't get out. Even if the charging is an issue, range is an issue, but still people have to believe. That's the first thing. Let's get more cars on the road, more choices for the consumers, more options, make it jazzy even. If people are wanted a kind of stylish car, in addition to the electric buses, let's give the option. That's one. I think the second one is, for my thing, is about the charging infrastructure. China went in a model of putting charging infrastructure as a first build-up then brought in the policies and the manufacturing, we may not follow that route. We may have to do as we go by. So even if we cannot have charging station everywhere, at least people should know where the charging stations are. So the charging station, charging infrastructure, the whole host of conversation around that need to happen. That's the second thing. And the third one is where everyone, the government, manufacturers, and the utilities and others, where there is a business opportunity, one thing all have to do is increase awareness. How people exploding the myths that electric mobility is something expensive, you will get stuck on the way. So we have a common third thing is about a common goal of increasing awareness, exploding the myth. And the fourth one is what right now happened 4 months ago it is about mindful of the transition and the just transition it should happen. It is not that we go and bulldoze this way without thinking about the social consequences of what is happening around, including the potential job losses in the auto sector. That's very important for us. And the fourth one or fifth one, whatever the number is, it's about coherence of policies. There is no national policy on EV. We have a FAME 2 in a way, which is more demand creation policy framework. There is no national EV policy, whereas there are 10 state-level EV policies sitting there. Each one have their own way of perception of what the EV policy at this state-level context look like. I think it is important we need to have a coherence. They should talk to each other just so that it is not that one is go for just drawing investment, another one is going air quality like Delhi does. So that's the fifth one, we need to ensure coherence. And the last one is not last one. Next one is about more capacity on the ground. Including civil society. It is not a technical aspect. It is about people how move from point A to point B and what options. And there need to be more people talking about not just few elite one understand the power electronics or the process chemistry of battery.
So that I will have to ask you to pause here because I need to take two closing comments on Cheryl and Harj before we wrap up this panel.
Yeah, this is that's the last one point is the technical ecosystem, how we promote in terms of the entrepreneurship, the startup ecosystem, how we provide finance.
Sure.
I think those are the few things I would say we need to do.
Yeah, thank you for that. Cheryl, very quickly, I want you to touch upon your experience with working with the government of Singapore in establishing Singapore as a city-state, as a living lab for sustainable innovation.
Absolutely. One of our key projects at the moment is the Center of Innovation in Singapore. We look at 4 key verticals. We look at power, built environment, mobility, and transportation, as well as infrastructure. So the government, my experience there has been that public-private partnerships has been critical in leveraging private capital towards public test beds, working with a lot of different startups, creating an innovation ecosystem, like my colleague has pointed out. I've seen that to be really the key in moving the ecosystem forward, because we also need to deal with questions about governance and regulations.
Wonderful. And Harj, you get the last word on this panel. So while you are describing Hyperloop 1, you mentioned about the ecosystem approach and not only bringing a technology transformation, but also bringing in the global value chains along with that to a country, and that's where you justify costs, etc. So if you can elaborate more on that and how we build this global value chain approach in bringing more technologies to the country.
Sure. I think, that, again, sort of just, I touched on it earlier on when I was speaking, but talking about the value chain, talking about economics, and talking about here why in India. First of all, when we started to look at the wider socio-economic benefits that come out of a first mover or a brand new technology like ours, we did some studies. We wanted to understand what would happen if we brought manufacturing of high technology components to India. So we sat with KPMG and we went through all of the various components that we require, from the aero shell, the pod shell, to the power electronics, to the levitation, to the guidance, to the software. All of it. We broke it down by component, and then we decided, right, okay, what can we source here in India? And then from that exercise, we worked out that we could actually source 74% of the components that we need here in India. What we then did was, of that, how much of it would benefit the state? And we worked out that 70% of that 74 could be manufactured and sourced within Maharashtra itself. So that, to us, was a huge area of economic benefit that would directly tribute to the goals that I pointed out with respect to jobs and synergies. I think the other thing is, what are we doing? We're creating a world leader in transportation technology by the first mover here. And that enables us to set up manufacturing, create those jobs, but then export this technology out of India. Because my role is actually not just India, but I cover the whole Middle East and Asia as well. So for us, we needed a hub, we needed a high technology, high skilled manufacturing base. Why not invest our money into this, create the world's first Hyperloop project, and then really roll it out from here. And that is the basis and the fundamental that we've utilized going forward. And it makes sense, absolute sense.
Thanks a lot, Harj, Siddarthan, Catherine, Mahesh, and Cheryl. It was very engaging learning from you what are the best practices, what technology disruptions could happen, where is the future of mobility, what can work for India, and how do we go about that. Thank you very much, everybody, to be present here and listening to us. I had to rush through the last section of that, so we didn't have time for question and answers if there were any questions. But some of us will be staying back here. If you have any individual questions, feel free to reach out to the panelists and take that one-on-one. Thank you, everyone.